Hello, and thanks for tuning into Ukraine Update from Compass Media. Every week, myself, Finn Van Markey, I'm joined by John Moran, who is former head of the foreign desk for the Irish press. And we look at what's happening in Ukraine. And this week, we're going to look at some other international matters as well in relation to relations with China. John, thanks for joining us again this week.
No problem, Finbar. Well, we've a very interesting week this week, I must say. And for any of you who have ever worked in a newspaper, you'll know what I mean when I say you can prepare a story or a selection of stories, and they can be changed 5 minutes before you go to publish. So you might have to review what you do, which I had to do this week, because while Ukraine is a huge story, it has been overtaken, in my view, by the China story. There was a wonderful development during the week when China secured a peace deal in the Middle East. It brought together two mortal enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and diplomatic relations have resulted from that. Now, given that China was the one who brought these two sides together, that is an extremely important point to bear in mind, because what I'm going to tell you is that the world is fragmenting. It changed last Friday in that meeting in Beijing, when the three leaders shook hands on that new agreement for the Middle East. It took everybody by surprise. I'm sure all the people who plan all their events will have had to scrub all the things that they had planned to deal with this situation. In fact, the response in the West struck me as being totally stunned, as if they didn't know what to do. Because what you tend to do in these situations, is not stand back. You think along the same lines that you think all along. It's all about Ukraine, but it's not. And that's what is the case this week. The US in particular was left looking foolish after Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who had just been on a tour of the Middle East, visiting all the sunny countries, trying to arrange for them to join together in a war against Iran. Now, if that doesn't show you the complete opposite positions of the United States and China, then I don't know what will. What is clear from the information that has happened since, and which is why I'm bringing this to your attention, is a US congressman who had just visited China actually said when he came back, we are at war with China. Now, when you couple that with, in the recent few days, the United States has quadrupled the number of soldiers it has in Taiwan, boots on the ground, that is a far more disturbing situation. If we have a war with China, it's going to make Ukraine look like a playground. It'll be vast. It'll involve everyone. And they will want us to be involved as well, just like they did in Ukraine. Now, another development that again put a spark into this particular issue was in San Diego. Joe Biden, the British Prime Minister, and the Australian Prime Minister agreed on the creation of a NATO in the South, or more like the Five Eyes in the South, whereas you'd have the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom being united as one against all the rest, in particular against China. Now, in the immediate aftermath of that AUKUS deal, which involves nuclear submarines, the Indonesians have been outraged by the agreement because they actually had an agreement that there would be no nuclear weapons in the region. But see, little people can be ignored in these situations by certain actors, but not by others. The UK, the US, and Australia are partners in the Five Eyes intelligence groups, which are basically all the countries that have emerged from Britain, Anglo-Saxon country, in other words. But their approach could not be more different to that of China. Now, what's going to happen in the immediate and medium future is, in my view, unless the US pulls in its horns on this one, I think this is where the world problem will be, not Ukraine. Ukraine is over.
Isn't it worrying, John, that in the United States, it would appear that particularly in the Republican Party, those that are against the Ukraine war and the financing of the Ukraine war are actually for war with China and just want to refocus the war effort. So both major parties in the United States are for war. And as you say, the bigger picture is the planning for war with China. And there's the filters are off, it would appear, when it comes to Australian politicians, American politicians, Canadian politicians. They're all out for China. And again, the EU and Europe will suffer most economically for a start, even before we talk about nuclear issues, because, as an example, China is Germany's biggest trading partner.
One of the interesting things with regard to the China story, which makes it, the number one story, is, for example, next week there's going to be a meeting between Xi and Putin. He is also going to phone Zelensky. Now, given what happened in Beijing, and given that the Chinese in particular take their diplomacy very, very seriously, he will not be phoning Zelensky just to listen to him ask for weapons. He will have a plan for the ending of the war in Ukraine. And in fact, I suspect he might have a strong word in President Putin's ear on that front. So I think that's the big thing to watch for next week, that meeting, to see if Xi has the same magical touch in Ukraine as he had in the Middle East.
And just maybe to emphasize the importance of what happened in the Middle East and the impact of it on the war in Yemen, there is a likelihood that this may be the beginning of the end of the war in Yemen as Iran and Saudi Arabia reach a rapprochement and reach an understanding of how to work together in the Middle East. And it's something, the Yemen war has been something that has been a blemish, particularly on the West, because it's our armaments that are going into it. And it has been completely ignored. And for China to be able to go out of its side of its own region and without any fanfare, without any big rigmarole leading up to it, to be able to create this agreement between these two countries. It is, as you say, groundbreaking. It's showing that the world that we lived in last year, even last week, has changed fundamentally.
I would say to all the white people in the world, your day is up. The British Empire and its sister empire in America, they're over. That day is done. We have entered a new epoch, the epoch of China, or as President Trump would say, China.
Yeah.
Like China. Interestingly, the Republicans don't like China, while the Democrats don't like Ukraine. It's a curious difference.
Yeah, but both of them are equally negative, I think. John, in terms of just returning back to what's happening in Ukraine, maybe have you any new updates from the Bakhmut front, from the battle lines?
What I was saying to you there is, I think that I suspect that it's the beginning of the end for Ukraine in Donbass. They're finished. I think the final move on making the complete surround to turn it into a, what's this they call it? They used to call it a kettle or something, but it's just basically they're surrounded, a cauldron, turns it into a cauldron. So everyone in there just become fish in a barrel, and they can surrender or die. That's it. So that's, you're talking about 10 to 15,000 troops in there. There's about 25 to 35 in the neighborhood. And there is a possibility that the Ukrainians who had planned for an offense, a major offense in Zaporizhia to try and reach Melitopol and break the route down to Mariupol so they could retake Mariupol. That is the number one aim of the Ukrainian army. Personally, I don't think it's possible. I think it's too late for that. I think they've lost too many soldiers, far too many of their best soldiers, their officers. You can't replace those people. You can drag people off the street all you like, but you'll never make a good soldier out of them.
We actually put out a compilation of some of the videos of the many hundreds of videos of conscription teams abducting people off the street in quite violent ways and sending them to the front lines. So that's on mcompassmedia.com website if people want to look at that, just to be able to prove and validate what we are saying. John, I noticed from these maps that we can see on screen at the moment that although that cauldron, or that as you described it last week, maybe more accurately, that horseshoe shape, although it's staying and it's tightening, the north and south, the Russian forces seem to be just moving forward. Bakhmut is almost looking like something in the past for them, to the degree that they are continuing to advance forward to very significant degrees, particularly in the north.
Yeah, that's very, very important what they're doing there. And what they're doing there is actually, it is with regard to Bakhmut, because artillery positions there are attacking the Russian artillery positions that are surrounding Bakhmut. So the move across the north of Bakhmut and out from Bakhmut is to push the artillery that is there further away so they can't interfere with the Bakhmut operation.
And there's also north on that map, we can see probably the darkest pink area, just at the very top of a little enclave there.
Yeah.
From there northwards, I believe that there are significant numbers of Ukrainian tanks, both tanks that were in reparation and tanks that are prepared as well. And that they seem to be one of the objectives of the Russians seems to be to surround those tanks and prevent them from coming down towards Bakhmut, or for, like we've been hearing day after day, week after week, these pronouncements from the Ukrainian side about new counteroffensive. But there seem to be little attempts at counteroffensives that peter out. It looks like it's sewn up by the Russians.
It does, however, there is one thing that I am afraid of, which is that It seems that Biden is trying to push for an offense by the Ukrainians. And unfortunately, a lot of this is for the cameras, for the photographs, so they can say something. But it's all going wrong. It's all falling apart. I mean, I don't keep up with the papers as much as I used to do with regard to these matters, because they're taking their stories from the Guardian and the Telegraph and the New York Times, and I have them anyway. So it's not where you get your news these days anyway, I would say. Uh, these days, the best commentators are outside of mainstream media.
Yeah.
People like Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald.
Mercurius, people like that. And there's somebody that's actually on the front lines and has been there since this started and long, long before it. And it's a guy called Patrick Lancaster. And we
Mm.
were actually supposed to interview him on the day that Russia started its military operation and went into Ukraine. And so we couldn't contact him after that. But we have a couple of videos. You have consistently raised the human rights issue of the bombing of residential areas in Donetsk city on nearly every program, and rightly so. And Patrick was there today and yesterday. He made some videos that he has put out of the bombing, one bombing which killed a child, and he also has another video out showing the grad rockets that are used to attack civilians, and he speaks about where they come from. So we're just going to look at those two videos quickly, John,
Sure.
and then we'll come back to you.
I'm Patrick Lancaster. Right now we're in the Petrovka district of Donetsk, and once again, Ukrainian shelling has decimated the civilian population, or continued to decimate it here in the Petrovka district of Donetsk. And we can see this apartment behind me where a direct hit took place early this morning, just after 8 o'clock. And unfortunately, 2 apartments were destroyed. I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we are here in the Petrovka district of Donetsk, where Ukrainian shelling came down on this apartment building behind me and knocked out 2 apartments, totally destroyed almost 2 apartments. And we have found this shrapnel here that appears to be M549 155 millimeter shells that are supplied to the by the West to Ukraine, and these hit this apartment building and severely injured a 14-year-old boy. This is just more facts, more proof that the West is supplying ammunition to Ukraine to shell and kill civilians.
John, what did you think? I know that you're monitoring this on a daily basis anyway, but there's more footage of civilians being killed, civilian areas being attacked with no military purpose whatsoever. It's just ongoing. There's been no change since we spoke about it last week, has there?
No, there hasn't. And mainstream media still aren't covering the story in the same way they're not covering the story of the daily bombardment of Zaporizhia nuclear plant. That's just not being covered. Nothing to do with Donbass from the Donbass perspective is done. I mean, to me, this is a Donbass story. I've been following this for 8 years, and it was always a Donbass story. It didn't start in 2022, on the 24th of February.
Where is the Red Cross? Where's the UN? Where's the OSCE? Where are they? The videos are coming out every day. It's undeniable. It's quite clear from satellite imagery where the missiles are coming from. Where are these international organizations that are supposed to be impartial, that are supposed to seek justice for the individual that's been attacked, for the group that's been attacked? Have you seen any pronouncement from them against what's going on in Donetsk? Because I haven't.
Nothing. You hear nothing from mainstream media. You hear nothing from politicians. They want us to be involved with the Ukrainian army. I think that's disgusting, personally, given the performance of some of their soldiers. But in reality, it's not just the Azov battalions. There is a unfortunate strain of far right, extremely far right there, that goes back for a long, long time. And it's essentially about that region's relationships, you know, from the time it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then
Parts of
that
the
falls
Polish Empire.
apart. I mean, it keeps falling apart and getting back together and all that. But it's a mess because of the local hatreds and the wars and the little wars and the ongoing wars and the feuds and all of that have been going on a long time. I mean, one of the reasons why Jews are hated is because they're associated with Russia, you know?
Yeah. And another human rights issue that you've been noting, and again, it feeds into the idea of developing hatreds, and maybe old hatreds being stoked up in different ways. And we have the situation that you've raised time and again of the suppression of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, especially over the last year, because it's associated allegedly with Russia. And we have a video now, which I found quite moving in many ways, of at a monastery that is due to be shut down, where a large group of civilians got together and they sang their religious songs, and it was quite moving. And it's something that I would not see out of place from a 1930s film outside a synagogue. We'll have a look at this and we'll come back.
Господу помолим серцем всім. Господи, помилуй, Господи, помилуй, Господи, помилуй. Господу помолимся серцем всім.
John, you had that video up on your Twitter this week. It's quite an emotive video, isn't it, to see people come out and in such a peaceful way reject policies that are denying them their freedom to religion.
Well, when you think about it, in this country, we had that problem a long time ago, but to see it happening again now in Europe is just shocking. There are hundreds of people of all ages huddled together outside the monastery, and they're praying and there's hymns being sung, but they are all in serious trouble because what they are doing is attending a Russian religious service. Anything Russian in Ukraine, even religion, is despised.
It's insane, isn't it? There's a video come out over the last few days from Ukraine. We've seen hundreds of these videos of people being cellophane to poles. It started off last February, just over a year ago, and we were seeing people being left in winter. They were having their trousers and underwear pulled down. They were being publicly beaten. They were being left there in the freezing cold overnight. We don't know what happened to them. It would appear some of it was being done to Romani gypsies. Some of it was being done to people because they were Russian speakers, even though a third of Ukraine is Russian speakers. Some of it was being done because people didn't agree with the war. This footage we're going to show, I think, is the lowest of the low that I've seen so far, because it's elderly women being cellophaned to a pole somewhere in Ukraine. We can only imagine why, possibly because they gave their opinions on something. We'll have a look at this and we'll come back in a minute.
Що ти делала?
Курейську ви ждали.
Ну, де ви діли пакет з документами, з продуктами? Де ви діли? Говори.
Свет, Андрій, ви ж сказали, та не готова. Ви сказали, що підете своїм котам понесете теж. І пішли.
Мы вообще его не брали, потому что мы вообще даже его не видели.
Пакет не
John, that was a video of pensioners, elderly ladies being tied to poles in a lynching almost fashion. What do you make of that? How low are things going in Ukrainian society?
Well, you see, unfortunately, when you have an existing issue, like, say, for example, anti-Semitism that can lead to extreme, very far-right extremism. We've had that in Ukraine for decades and decades. Unfortunately, it's taught in school as well, the hatred of all things Russian. Cut the Russian, stab the Russian, hang the Russian. In school, they're taught this nonsense, you know, and that is going to seep through into all aspects of life. I mean, that's what the Russians mean when they say they want to denazify Ukraine. It's to stop teaching children hatred of their neighbors, hatred of their fellow countrymen who happen to be of a different type. And unfortunately, that's rampant in Ukraine.
And it's also very much reflected in videos coming out from the battle lines as well, I think. If you want to look, there's one particular video on mcompassmedia.com, and we wouldn't be able to show it on social media generally. And it's of a number of what appears to be a number of Ukrainian soldiers moving towards Russian lines with a white flag surrendering. And someone behind them on a high ledge who's also filming, probably from their helmet, shoots them. It appears that they've been shot for surrendering. We can't clarify anything that comes out from Ukraine 100%, but when you put the context together, the balance of probabilities is that is what was happening in the video. John, you have another video that you put out on your Twitter. It's pretty strong, and it's again of Russian injured soldiers being shot dead by Ukrainians, and clearly they were not a threat in any way. We're going to look at that video. We are advising viewer discretion, and we're going to come back in a few seconds.
27, 27, стой, пушка, пулемет работает. 27, стой! Руки, руки, блядь! Башня впереди, Саша есть, не башня.
So that was very strong video of what appears to be wounded Russian soldiers being shot dead by Ukrainian soldiers. This kind of video footage is coming out on a daily basis. It's really, really horrific. It's you wouldn't expect to see it in the last century, never mind this century. John, it's just ongoing. What is the purpose in this cruelty?
Well, it's worse than you say, because the reason that we know about it is because they are putting up these videos themselves. They're proud of what they do. Sometimes they put music to it to entertain you even more about some horrific event, some horrific expression of their hatred.
Are these the children, John? I've seen videos, and some of them go back 10 years, of essentially Nazi camps where children are being taught to be Nazis, and are very well attended by the looks of them. And, you know, some of these videos came from mainstream media outlets that until last year said that there was a Nazi problem in Ukraine, but seemingly have changed their mind over the last year. And so are these soldiers and these people, are these the children that were raised in hate, do you think?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if you saw the school books they were reading and what they said about Russians, who they call orcs, and they see them as subhuman, you know, less than they are. And they have a view of themselves that they are the cream of the white races. And their worst elements say things like, we want to kill all the Jews who lead the Untermenschen, you know, the Russians and that. And that's an old story from the Second World War.
But on saying that, John, as well, I think it's important to say that not all Ukrainians are of that belief. And there was academic work done 5-6 years ago trying to ascertain the support that the fascists had in Ukraine. And they didn't have very much political support, but they seem to have made a decision years ago that rather than look for electoral support, that they would inveigle themselves into the administration and into the military and the police of Ukraine. And that's the way they've got power. It's not necessarily that they're supported by a majority of the people, and that the majority of the people have that belief system. But there's a small enough but strong enough, powerful enough clique to have taken control. And a part of their ability to take control is their abject non-concerned use of violence and threats?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, they're a very small percentage of Ukrainian society. That must be said. First of all, they are a very small percentage. The problem is that some of the views that they would have would be shared by others. And when somebody asks you, do you support the Nazis? Very few people are going to say yes. In contested societies, like the North, for example, people have lots of ways of questioning to find out which one are you.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the same there. So you wouldn't tell people or let people know stuff like that. But it is a huge strain. It's a powerful strain. It may be small. And I will also say that it was these groups that were formed to overthrow the elected government of Ukraine with the help of the United States and Britain. They used these groups as their muscle for the Maidan. When anything happened, they'd be brought into the situation, and they don't mess about. They are extreme violence is their thing.
And just to move on, John, we have a lot to cover this evening. We have a video here of the Prime Minister of Finland attending a funeral of one of those far-right extremists, of one of the Azov leaders. We'll just have a look at this video now, just to show how much support this far-right element in Ukraine is getting from international leaders. That was a video of the Prime Minister of Finland attending a funeral of one of the Azov leaders. The Azov battalions, as they used to be known anyway, are a part of the Ukrainian National Guard and wear far-right extremist Nazi-style emblems. And many of them, especially their founders, carry similar beliefs to those from 1930s fascist groups. John, are you surprised to see the Prime Minister of Finland at such a funeral?
I was surprised to see it. I really thought she'd have more sense than to do that. But it appears to me that, she has been involved in a few attention-seeking, shall we say, events, like at parties where drugs are taken and things like that. But in this instance, when you have the Prime Minister of a country attending a Nazi funeral, and a few years ago, Jeremy Corbyn was laid low for only a charge of anti-Semitism, which was completely untrue. So you can kill Jeremy for less, and there she is in the belly of the beast. I think it's a bloody disgrace.
It is madness. And then you had Azov represented in the US Houses of Congress as well. It just beggars belief. And I often think to myself and ask myself the question, what happens if Ukraine wins? Does that mean that we have an actual Nazi-controlled state that's applying to be a member of Europe, maybe will become a member of Europe, but we have a Western-funded actual Nazi state if Ukraine were to win? There's very little possibility, I think, that Ukraine is going to have a military success in this. But on saying that, one never knows. Just on a more recent story coming from Ukraine, or just on the Black Sea, in fact, an American drone, a US military drone, crashed into the Black Sea for whatever reason. It's hard to tell exactly why. Some people are saying that Russian jets dropped fuel on it and different things like that. Ultimately, all we know is it crashed into the Black Sea. And there's been a bit of furore about it. John has his own personal take on this, but before we do that, I just want to look at what the Russian ambassador to the United States said about this.
Американским самолетам и кораблям нечего делать вблизи границ Российской Федерации. Вы можете себе представить, что такой самолет, беспилотник, вдруг появится недалеко от Нью-Йорка или Сан-Франциско? Вы можете себе представить, какая будет реакция американских СМИ, Пентагона в отношении такого дрона? Это многоцелевой, ударный беспилотник, который может нести 1700 килограмм взрывчатки. Скажите, как будет реагировать Министерство обороны любой страны, если вблизи границ своего государства появится такая опасность? Однако я хочу подчеркнуть, что российские летчики действовали очень профессионально. Не было контакта, не было использования никакого оружия нашими истребителями.
So that's the Russian ambassador to the United States, Antonov. And he was essentially making the point there that what the hell do the Americans have drones in the Black Sea looking into Russia for in the first place? And they have no place being there. Any take on this, John?
Yeah, the matters concerning American military material are always fraught with danger because it could lead to escalation. That's the principal issue at stake in that particular instance. Could it lead to an escalation? And it struck me after a while there were people saying all sorts of things and getting excited. But to me, that was a nothing event. If anything I would take from that, it could possibly be a message from Russia to say the game is up. No more Mr. Nice Guy. They're coming in heavy. It could mean that.
Okay. I saw Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican Party in the United States. He was on Hanratty. God help me for seeing Hanratty, but a part of my role, I think, is to look at everything. But he was on Hanratty and he was asking the question, what would Ronald Reagan have done? He would have shot those Russian planes out of the sky. And that's essentially what he was calling for. I know it's hard to take him seriously, but he does have sway in the Republican Party. The Republican Party has sway in some of the houses of government in the United States. What do you make of the likes of Lindsey Graham making statements like that?
Well, the reason, as you rightly say, he has sway, Lindsey Graham, is because he gets so much money from the various big war, big oil, big tech, all of these people. And because he will have all that cash, he distributes that cash to people he likes for their election. So he gets friends who want to be re-elected, who could do with a few thousand here and there. So that's how he builds up his little power base. But he's the one who's getting the money from these companies.
And he's big into attacking China as well, isn't he? He just loves the war.
He has never met a war that he didn't love. I mean, he was exactly the same about Ukraine. He's speaking for big war industry. That's who he's speaking for. He's not a politician. He is, but he doesn't represent the people. He represents something else, the corporations.
And how does he get elected? Because he's the type of guy, if I was at school with him, I'd be flicking bits of paper at him all day. He's just, how does he get elected?
He has a choice of maybe two people. And maybe he's bad, but the other guy is worse, you know? If you look at the two parties that you have, I mean, there's no difference between them. It's Tweedledum and Tweedledee, that's all. But what never happens is what the people want gets done. That never happens.
Now, on that subject, last week you were talking about the need for a developing protest movement against the war in Ukraine, and I would presume against the development of war with China. Every week there are protests happening in Europe. We're going to show a video of a protest from Bilbao in northern Spain against the further NATOification of Spain. So that was a video of a protest out of Bilbao. Before we discuss protests in general, I just want to show two more very quick videos from Georgia. Last week and over the last few days, we've been inundated with protests of or images and videos of what we're being told is peaceful protests by the people of Georgia against a draft law which would require agencies, companies, organizations that receive more than 20% of the funding from outside of the state, that they would have to register. And that's to stop foreign interference. The United States has for many decades a far more severe law. The EU is bringing in a similar law right now. But those groups that are receiving this foreign funding and that are clearly receiving funding to influence the internal politics, particularly to be against Russia, those groups went into overdrive last week with protests. We saw images of women's iconic images of women waving EU flags and things like that. We weren't showing the images of riots. We weren't showing the images of people coming fully prepared for trouble, for riots, for attacks on the police, and what looked to me like a complete replication of what was done in Kiev in 2013 and 14. We're going to have a look at protests that are happening yesterday and today from Georgia, which is the Georgian people themselves rising up and saying, no, we don't agree with the protests from last week. We support that draft law and we support a sovereign and independent Georgia. Have a look at these videos. So there are videos from Georgia. Last week, John, you were talking about the need for a developing kind of a resistance protest movement. Do you see any signs of that happening?
Well, from talking to people around town, I have noticed that there has been a bit of a mood change. Originally for the first week, people were hostile to you and they hated you and all of that. If you expressed any view that wasn't, I love that little man, And I hope that reality is beginning to settle in. And I think it is, because when you see what's happening now with China, remember that the United States went into Ukraine only after leaving Afghanistan. Now, they're not finished in Ukraine yet, but they are in a sense. They've got their $1 billion a day contract for replacing the Nord Stream gas. They've got that in their pocket. And that's what they wanted most of all. But they've also got hundreds of millions in contracts for weapons from all these countries in Europe that are scared shitless of them. Mm. I don't think they'll get that response in Ireland, because we want to be nice. We want to be good Europeans and all of that. But remember, they are slightly different than us. They are guys who were colonialists. We were colonized. So that's very important now, as we are moving to a multipolar world. That started on Friday. The multipolar world started on Friday, and it's going to move very, very fast. and we should not be with the warmongers. We should be with the people who just want to trade and have agreements whereby any agreement they enter into mustn't impinge on a third party. All that civilized stuff, rules-based international order, as the Americans call it. But we all know what that means. We need a new Pax Europa. That's what we need. And it must include Russia. Russia is part of the European tradition as any country. It's a great country. And I would like to see the day when none of this nonsense matters, that when you can do business internationally, you can do it. It isn't America telling you that if you don't follow us, it's either our way or the highway. You're either with us or against us. All of that bullshit, that all has to go. And I think it will go.
And that is pure gangsterism, isn't it? It's like, if you buy from that shop, we'll burn you down.
Well, it was a very interesting. I'd advise anyone who gets a chance to Google this, the response of the Mexican Prime Minister to the American. They threatened to go to war on Mexico. Did you notice that last week?
Yeah, we covered that on. If people want to read up on that and watch some videos on that, we have that on our website, mcompassmedia.com as well.
I mean, they're incontinent. You know, they cause wars all over the place. They can't help but turn around and cause a war. They've lost the plot.
But it does appear that their ability to influence matters is waning, even to the extent what they tried in Georgia. Although the draft was pulled, things are calming down in Georgia now. What they've tried in other places, they seem to be going maximum level of interference, but it's not working for them anymore. John, we're out of time here. Just in terms of what people might want to focus on over the coming week, is there any particular issue, event, or anything like that that you think people should keep an eye out for?
Well, I think the main one to keep an eye out for will be after the Xi-Putin meeting, there will be a phone call from Xi to Zelensky. And after that, we could have some, as the Chinese say, some interesting times.
John Moran, again, thanks for joining this week. We'll speak to you again next week. Like, share, subscribe where you can, folks, and thanks for tuning in.
Bye-bye.